What's the best way that you can help somebody? Have you ever gone to a restaurant and found a family or somebody you thought looked like they were in need and decided to pay for their meal? You know, paid for someone else's debt that you knew that they couldn't repay you. That's what it means to intercede, to stand in the gap for someone else, for another person. That's exactly what Jesus did every day of his life, and he still does for us today. We can measure our faith not just by belief, but by our actions. Faith without works is dead. Real faith costs something in time, effort, emotion, sometimes even pain. Have you ever seen someone suffer and said in prayer, Lord, bless them. Let the pain be upon me. Instead, give them some peace, maybe even just for a day. That's at the heart of what the Lord does. That's intercession. I had a friend once, or I still have a friend, uh, that knew that his brother was going to be killed in the Afghanistan war. He knew, he had that sense. He knew that was going to happen. And so, right away, every night, he prayed for him. And these were not just quick prayers before he went into bed. He prayed for hours and hours every night until he couldn't pray anymore. And he did this for months. And then one night, the Lord's voice came to him and told him, Stop praying. He'll be okay. And his brother did come home alive. And I wondered for a long time, you know, if that was God's will, why didn't God just save his brother from the start? Why did it require someone else to pay such a price through prayer and sacrifice and through tears? Because God operates by laws. Mercy and justice aren't opposites, they're partners. Mercy doesn't replace justice. Mercy gives more time for justice to be fulfilled. And mercy always costs something. Someone always has to pay. In my friend's case, he paid the part of that price, the emotional and spiritual, physical cost that allowed mercy to reach into his brother's life. He stood before the throne of God and said, Lord, count it on me, put it on my ledger. And God did. That's what it looks like to intercede for somebody else. That's why Jesus is the ultimate example of mercy and intercession. He lived his entire life paying the price for our benefit. Every miracle he performed, every prayer he offered, every drop of blood in Gethsemane, it was all intercession. And when you start walking more closely with the Lord, you begin to feel what he feels. You start to see the suffering in others, and you can't just walk by. Your heart aches, and that ache, that burden, is an invitation from heaven to intercede. The Apostle Paul wrote about this in Galatians 6:2. He said, Bear ye one another's burdens and fulfill the law of Christ. That's not poetry, that's a command. It means to step in, to pray, to fast, to mourn, and to serve others. Carry part of the weight for someone else that can't carry it alone. That's how you measure your faith, not by how much you know, but by how much you're willing to bear. The angels are sent as ministering spirits to serve, to protect, to call men to repentance, to improve. They plead on our behalf all the time, to hold back judgments, asking God to give more time, whispering comforts and warnings. And when you start interceding for others, you'll begin to act like those angels. You take on the same spiritual work they do. You stand between heaven and earth, pleading comfort, healing, protection. There is no better work, no higher work. years ago after my son passed away. I met a woman at a business conference that I knew not too well. I knew of her, hadn't really had a chance to talk to her much. And after one of the meetings, she walked up to me and she was very nervous and hesitant. But she said, I don't really ever do this. I'm not a religious person. I'm not part of a church, but I consider myself a spiritual person, and I feel like I have a message for you. And I can imagine, what it took, the courage it took for her to do such a thing. She didn't know how to react, if I would cast her away, humiliate her, make her feel foolish. She didn't know me that well, and she delivered the message anyway. And she said, while we were in one of our meetings, that she felt my son standing next to her during the meeting, or standing next to me, actually. And he said he wants you to know that he is sorry for the pain he caused you, not only in his passing, but in his life. He wants you to know it was part of God's plan. It was part of his plan, and he's happy. She did repeat that same line twice. It was part of God's plan. I sat there after talking to her. I thanked her for the message, but I was overwhelmed. How could something so painful and tragic be part of a merciful plan? But as I've learned to see things through God's eyes, I realize sometimes mercy looks like pain. Sometimes mercy removes someone from greater suffering. What if my son had stayed and made terrible choices and caused more pain to himself and others? God's mercy doesn't always look like comfort and peace. It can look like loss. And sometimes God even sends an intercessor like that woman to deliver a message of peace when it's needed. We can do that. We can be that kind of person for others. We can stand in that gap and plead with the Lord for others. Be the one that says, Father, give them more time. Pour out your mercy, and here's what I'm willing to do and pay for that mercy. It could be a family member, it could be a friend, someone going through a terrible divorce, or someone that's hurt you. To intercede means to love deeply enough to feel their pain and to carry a piece of it yourself. That's what Jesus does every day. That's what he asks those who truly follow him. So start acting more like him and the angels and intercede for others at God's throne. There's no greater calling. There's no better way to measure your faith than by the burdens you're willing to bear for others. If you want to know the Lord, start acting more like him. Intercede for someone today. That's how heaven works. That's how mercy is paid for. And that's how to become like him.